Hello and welcome to the 2024 Jacksonville Jaguars team preview. Trevor Lawrence now being paid as one of the very best players in the NFL. Will his fantasy production line up with that? Travis Etienne coming off an RB1 season. Will he do it again? Christian Kirk, Brian Thomas, Gabe Davis, Evan Engram, all that and so much more here in the next 30 minutes. So Jacksonville Jaguars team preview coming in hot. Strap in, everybody. I'm your host, Ian Harris. Welcome to the Fantasy Life Show. Joining me, as always, Fantasy Life Director of Analytics and all-around awesome person, Dwain "The Rock" McFarland. And yeah, Dwain, T-Law, generational prospect, so we were told, hasn't exactly lived up to it, but now you look up and he is tied with Joe Burrow for the league's highest paid player, at least on an annual basis. So will 2024 finally be the season that T-Law lives up to the hype?
Man, you are so excited about T-Law, like it's causing you to lose your voice.
I know.
I respect you pushing through that right there. Look, man, I get it. They got the first round pick invested in Trevor Lawrence. I mean, I still have some questions. It has gotten better from a fantasy perspective every year. Went from 214 passing yards per game to 242 to 251 last year. Yeah. So once you get into that, 240 to 260 range, you can typically support two pretty good fantasy options at receiver or tight end. And that's ultimately what we're asking from Trevor Lawrence. I think the real question, though, if we're looking at him as a person that we would want to be targeting in as a quarterback and getting really excited about it, I'm still just not there. This is a guy that against pressure has still not been great. Last year was definitely his best year. PFF had him at a grade of 51.3 with pressure on the play. Years before, 35 and 40, which were well below the league average. So I'm still torn, really, honestly, on Trevor Lawrence. My gut says 6 yards per attempt, 7 yards per attempt, and 7.1 yards per attempt, even though they put more and more weapons around him every single year. Like, I just would expect more, man. I'd expect Trevor Lawrence to, be somebody that, if for where he was taken in the draft and the money he just got, I would expect him to be one of these guys at 7.5 to 8.5 that's truly helping win games. I mean, if you look at the number one individual stat that correlates the most with winning football games at the quarterback position, it's yards per attempt. Now, I'm not saying that's everything, but that's just the one with the strongest correlation. It's what the data tells us. And in my opinion, I don't think Lawrence has been someone that's necessarily elevated everyone around him. Now, I know last year there were a lot of crazy things that happened with the Jaguars, and so I do buy into that some. If you go watch the film, you look at the throws that Trevor Lawrence was making, he was dropping some crazy dimes, and he wasn't always getting that paid off by his receivers. So I do want to acknowledge that. But I still think the contract that he got, I think that's still a leap of faith.
Yeah, certainly. And hopefully, based on that contract, we haven't seen the best of T-Law yet. I mean, he is still only 24 years old. My man cannot legally rent an RV until October, Dwain. So certainly we still have some growing to do. Could probably buy 10 RVs and put, one in each state if he really wanted to, but that is beside the point. I will put some context into exactly what he was dealing with last year. I've talked about my supporting cast rating, 28th, 20th, and 30th over the first 3 years of his career. I've had a near miss touchdown mixtape go viral amongst Jaguars Twitter ever since I made it in January. I still see it pop up. And yeah, if you want to, again, dive into just the total EPA loss from those drop passes, nobody lost more total EPA from drops. And if you actually, shout out Ben Baldwin, include the drops and then also the Jaguars' poorest pass blocking, I mean, unironically, man, a top 3 quarterback in EPA per play last season. So I do want to give some mindfulness to that. And also him playing through a hell of a lot of pain. I mean, you did a great job in our Saints preview, Dwain, kind of mentioning everything Derek Carr went through. T-Law wasn't too far behind him. I mean, week 6, he bruised his knee, high ankle sprain in week 13, concussion in week 15, and then a sprained AC joint in week 16. So certainly has kind of that Gumby factor where there's been several times over the years where I thought we were about to see Lawrence, miss the rest of the season, somehow trots back out there for the next drive. So I guess the final point would be, can he be better in at least fantasy than he has been or will be in real life? QB 29, QB 11, and QB 15 in fantasy points per game for his career. And Dwain, I mean, he ran for 339 yards and 4 touchdowns last year. Like, they actually do use him a decent amount inside the 5-yard line. More carries inside the 5 than Lamar Jackson over these past 2 seasons. So when I'm looking at his ESPN ADP, man, pick 157 going behind locked in pocket passers like Kirk Cousins, like Jared Goff and Aaron Rodgers, amongst others. Look, I think it's hard to rank T-Law in the top 12. I don't have him there, but top 15 ahead of those guys, man, that's where I'm signing up.
Yeah, I think you're still obviously, hoping for him to continue to advance. I mean, I think that's the reason that if you're going to take T-Law over those guys, is they're getting older. They could start to trend the other way. Yep. Whereas, and some of those guys, I'm not worried about it really at all. But like Stafford, I mean, he's definitely getting up there. But if you look at T-Law, you're hoping that he's still ascending. I mean, the challenge is like, can he truly ever turn into a pocket passer that can give us the upside for 35 to 40 passing touchdowns? You know, I mean, the Jaguars went out and invested in Brian Thomas Jr. They bring in Gabe Davis. You know, Davis, look, you guys know, I'm not a huge Gabe Davis fan, but he is a vertical threat that can catch a touchdown. He can, you know, give you some upside in that area on your team. We have Calvin Ridley moving on, but you've still got Christian Kirk. You've got Evan Engram. So he's got weapons, you know, around him. I don't think he's got any tier A+ weapons. We'll see what happens with Brian Thomas Jr. Does he eventually develop into one of those? But he's got enough like B weapons around him, right? That you got B's, kind of B's and like a D with Davis like across the board. So I think there's still a chance. It's just it's hard to predict it though. You know, it's hard to like go out and pound the table for, oh, Trevor Lawrence, I'm waiting and he's the guy I'm going to target. It's more or less, okay, quarterback didn't work out quite the way I planned. I'm in this range. At least I know Trevor Lawrence is young and maybe he takes a step forward. I'm going to take him over some of these older dudes.
Good way of putting it there. I would say, man, depends on the ADP and where you're going. But once I get to, again, that Jaden Daniels, Jordan Love, kind of Caleb Williams, that's right where the edge is, Dwayne. We're like, I definitely want one of those guys to be my starting quarterback in, you know, a typical 12-team home league roster. So if you can't, that's when Trevor Lawrence really comes into play. Otherwise, let's try to, again, get someone better, because the wide receiver room, it is a new look, Dwayne. You know, Calvin Ridley and Zay Jones are out. Brian Thomas Jr. and Gabe Davis are in, but still probably not exactly, you know, fitting inside anyone's top 5 best skill position weapon, you know, units inside the NFL. That said, wide receiver 1, Christian Kirk, is back and ready to lead the way. Was actually better last year in terms of yards per route run and targets per route run than he was in 2022, his debut season with the Jaguars, but got hurt and ended up missing 5 games. So wide receiver 33 in PPR points per game. Was the wide receiver 28, though, if we get rid of his 1-snap week 13 performance, wide receiver 18 in 2022. So I dug into this, Dwayne, and the big difference for Kirk was just clearly red zone usage. I mean, he caught 7 touchdowns on 22 targets inside the 20 in 2022. Last year, 0 for 5 throughout the entire season. And that was directly because Calvin Ridley's 26 red zone targets were the 3rd most in the NFL. So as much as I want to say, oh, Ridley's out, maybe Kirk can go back to getting those red zone looks, when you add 2 skyscraper receivers like Gabe Davis and Brian Thomas Jr. in the equation, I have a hard time overly believing in Kirk. So his price isn't terrible. I think around wide receiver 30 is fine. Not exactly someone, you know, I'm just constantly reaching for to land on the fantasy squad, though.
Yeah, I mean, if we look at the last 3 seasons, 12.1, 14.3, and 12.1 fantasy points per game. You know, if we go back to 2011, the average fantasy points per game for a wide receiver 3 at the very bottom end, wide receiver 36, is 12. Christian Kirk is a mid-range to low-end wide receiver 3. His talent profile mirrors all those things. Target earning profile looks like a wide receiver 3. Yards per route run, wide receiver 3. He's played with pretty good quarterbacks his whole career, so I don't really have any spot to, even though Trevor Lawrence hasn't lived up to expectations, like he's never had to play with a terrible quarterback. And so there's nothing that I can really point to and say, oh, well, really, we need to adjust, you know, his yards per route run or something like that because he's been in a horrible offense with a bad quarterback. So when I look at Christian Kirk, I think at this point, we just know it is what it is. He's a wide receiver 3. His ceiling is he could perform like a wide receiver 2 if he runs hot in the touchdowns. Yeah. He could be a wide receiver 4 if things run really bad and suddenly Brian Thomas Jr. is actually an alpha and we don't know it yet. So I think that's the range. Just treat him like a wide receiver 3.
I will say ESPN, like if you want to draft Christian Kirk, that is your platform to do so because his overall ADP 96 right now. I mean, he's going pick 82 on Yahoo, inside the top 70 picks over on FFPC and NFFC. So I'm not even going to bring up the underdog wide receivers. They, you know, exist in their own kind of, you know, world with how early everyone's going over there. But yeah, even relative to other redraft sites, you know, Christian Kirk certainly looking like a value over at ESPN. The other wide receivers, Dwayne, I mean, Gabe Davis, someone that you've, you know, spoken a lot about over the years. He does do a good job scoring touchdowns. He is really good friends with Shane Gillis, but otherwise, man, really have a hard time getting behind him. So I do think his blocking and stuff like helps out the real life offense and everything. He's making over $30 million on the contract for a reason. But for me, I would really like to believe, and I do believe that Brian Thomas Jr. is the number 2 wide receiver here in Jacksonville from day one.
Yeah, I mean, I just Gabe Davis has never done enough, like as a target earner. Again, like he's a niche player. He's never fully developed his route tree. He is a guy that has a few routes that he's good at, but mostly he's going to press the vertical boundary for the offense and then allow other guys. You have to respect it, because if you don't, Gabe Davis, Josh Allen showed that if you leave him, without the coverage, like, he can beat you and he can score those long touchdowns. So I think he could still schematically, be something that serves a purpose, in this offense. The interesting part with Brian Thomas Jr. is really his two main routes in college where he was getting a lot of his fantasy production in college was really from the go route, or deep post routes, corner routes, those sort of things. And then the hitch route. Yeah. He didn't have a lot to offer in the intermediate game. Now, how much of that came down to they have other players that could attack that area, like Malik Neighbors? Did they just not ask him to do it? So that'll be an interesting development to watch. But I agree. I think you got to treat Brian Thomas Jr. as the wide receiver 2 in this offense. I think Brian Thomas Jr. is the wide receiver this season with the most upside in this offense. He right now, you can get in rounds, I believe, like 13, 14, and 15 in these ESPN and Yahoo drafts. That is an absolute steal. You should be taking your shots on him late in those rounds, in those drafts. He honestly, again, we could be doing the recap pod on a Sunday night after week 1 and be going, oh my God, Brian Thomas Jr. looks like a high-end wide receiver 2. Might he take a step to being a wide receiver 1? Remember, these are all B players with Evan Engram. I like Evan Engram, but right now he's a B tight end, right? Christian Kirk, B tight end. So there's not an alpha right now in this room to hold back, a true alpha if Brian Thomas Jr. were to turn into one. So I think there's room here that Thomas could have a really a bigger role than we expect. And I think the big playability is there. So even if he doesn't turn into a 25% target share guy, I think he has the ability to make the big plays where he can still score like 8 touchdowns and you end up still, being okay with it. So absolutely a player you want to be throwing darts in those late rounds.
My 6th most drafted wide receiver in best ball land this offseason. I mean, you said it, man, ESPN. And I was looking at some of the ADP trends, and it really seems like, guys, on ESPN, Yahoo, traditional redraft sites, a lot of rookies are going under the radar. I mean, I was just seeing, who has kind of the most volatility across all these different sites. And consistently, I want to say like 7 or 8 of the top 10 wide receivers with the largest standard deviations were, in fact, rookies. And also seeing guys, like Hollywood Brown on new teams where the public maybe just isn't adjusting as much as they should be at this point in time. So yeah, I mean, we're talking about Tyler Lockett, Jameson Williams, Mike Williams going right ahead of Brian Thomas. I am taking him over those guys every single time. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe the guy, Dwain, that scored a touchdown every 4 catches last year, scored the most touchdowns of any Power 5 wide receiver since Devonta Smith, is actually pretty good at football. I mean, just a freak among freaks. Not saying, a relative athletic score is the absolute be-all, end-all, but at 6'3", 209 with a 4.33 40, 0.01 10-yard split behind Xavier Worthy. Yeah, Brian Thomas Jr., 10th highest RAS score since 1987. I am betting on guys like that 8 days of the week. We talked about the pass game.
Dwayne, 135. I just checked it. 135 on ESPN, 129 on Yahoo. So
draft him every freaking time, people. Do it. Do it. All right, we'll talk a little more about Evan Engram and the rest of the pass game in a few minutes. But hey, Travis Etienne, Dwayne, we spoke on the Texans pod about guys I got wrong, aka Dalton Schultz. How about Travis Etienne come on down and the riding that RB1 volume to an RB7 finish in PPR points per game last season? Day 2 pick Tank Bigsby and pass down back to Michael Hasty were largely told to F off all season long. For the most part, we did actually see some pretty Ned Stark splits, between Etienne in the first half versus second half of the season, specifically in weeks 1 through 8. Etienne, first among all running backs in touches, second in PPR points. I mean, he was playing 81% of the snaps. Weeks 10 through 18, though, 66% of the snaps, fell down to 14th in touches, 15th in PPR points. So which version do you think we get, Dwayne? Because, again, right now, where he's being priced, typically outside the top 12 running backs, it seems like most people are expecting him to more so resemble the guy we saw the second half of the season, as opposed to legit the fantasy football superstar that was on display during, the better part of September and October.
It's probably somewhere in between. I mean, when I look at him, this is a player that's still going to be 25 when the year starts. I look at the rest of the depth chart, not that daunting. Tank Bigsby, they tried to give Tank Bigsby some of that stuff that we had talked about, and he crapped the bed. He fumbled the ball inside the 5-yard line. No better way to get yourself just iced for the year than to fumble inside the 5-yard line.
Do not throw the man the ball. Yeah. Even if there's a fire, do not throw him the football.
He's going to drop it. He had some pass pro errors. So Tank Bigsby, they've been talking up this offseason, coach speak. We'll see what happens with that. So, I mean, they've got a little bit of draft capital in him. I think they would still rather see he become the number 2, but I don't think he's a huge threat right now to Travis Etienne. We'll see how it works out. I will say the biggest thing Travis Etienne, to your point, had going for him last year is he got all the volume. You know, if we look at it, he had 68% of the rushing attempts. The average running back 1 on an NFL team, not average running back 1 in fantasy, average running back 1 on an NFL team over the last 3 years, 57% rush share. So he's well above that. So you'd expect him to finish where he did, but also not getting taken off the field in the high leverage passing opportunities in the 2-minute offense, 81%. Later in the year, Dearness Johnson did take part of that role away from him, and that did impact Travis Etienne. So I don't want to say that he's foolproof, but I think overall, right now, you got to look at him as being a guy that you should be ranking in your top 12 running backs.
And I completely agree, man. He's a guy that, again, I was wrong about last year. I thought too much about Tank Bigsby and company. But yeah, guess what? We saw that I was wrong. And now the same thing's going on. I am happy to draft Travis Etienne when he is falling into rounds, 4 in drafts where, again, I am trying to get a running back at that point. So I really think his lack of efficiency, more so than other running backs, can be explained away by his environment. Because you look at it, Jaguars last year, dead last in rushing yards before contact per carry with this offensive line. They were 4th in 2022. So 1.2 yard difference basically between their yards before contact almost makes up the entirety of Travis Etienne going from 5.1 yards per carry in 2022 to just 3.8 last year. And additionally, unlike someone like Josh Jacobs, for instance, where I go, okay, well, he didn't have this great environment, but why was Zamir White doing better than him, in the same offense? I mean, again, 3.8 yards per carry, not good for Etienne, but Tank Bigsby, 2.6. Dearness Johnson also at 2.6. You can clearly tell that Etienne is the man in this Jacksonville backfield. But yeah, guys, again, a lot of the stuff I just used there was courtesy of our tools at Fantasy Life, Dwain's utilization report, our ADP tool, again, rankings, projections, all that, and so much more. And guess what? You can get access to all of it with our brand new premium product, FantasyLife Plus. Stick around for a message from the one, the only Matthew Berry. We'll be back after his quick word.
When I started Fantasy Life, I had one mission in mind, really just one: fantasy football and sports betting for all. And what started out as just a newsletter has now grown into a full-fledged media company. And here I am to tell you we're ready to evolve yet again. I'm introducing Fantasy Life Plus. It's a premium product built upon a suite of fantasy and sports betting tools to take your game to the next level. I know, I hear you, really, Barry, a premium product? Okay, I understand, but get this. Our mission has not changed, right? Our newsletter will forever remain free. All of our expert analysis, free. And we will still provide sets of fantasy football rankings for free. Everything you need to be a great fantasy football manager, you will still be able to do for free at FantasyLife.com. But hey, if you really want to level up, then Fantasy Life Plus is for you. Fantasy Life Plus will introduce new tools like our Draft Champion, customizable rankings, site-wide league sync integration, player prop models, game models, DFS pick'em builders, and so much more. Seriously, just check it out. Go to FantasyLife.com to learn more. And as always, may your trades never be vetoed, may your flex plays always work out, and may your Monday Night Miracles always come through.
Great stuff, Matthew. All right, Dwain, we do have some continuity in this coaching staff. There was, a bit of a period where folks wondered if Doug Peterson and or offensive coordinator Press Taylor might get the axe, but they are back for their 3rd season together. So over these past 2 seasons, the Jags ranked 9th in raw pass play rate. The big question is, can they actually take a step forward at the line of scrimmage? That ended up dooming, again, a large part of their offense last year. PFF's ranked 27th ranked offensive line. They have tried to turn it over, though. Just 2 of those 5 rather bad starters are returning. So injuries played a role in that, but they play a role in every offense throughout the league. Overall thoughts on this scheme and what we should expect for 2024, Dwain?
Yeah, like it's a middle of the road scheme. It's not one where I get super excited about the things that the team is doing before the snap and stuff like that. There's some positives, but it's a pretty vanilla scheme in my opinion. They're going to line up 3 wide receivers most of the time, and they're just going to try to do their thing. So maybe that's another thing you guys could do. You just paid Trevor Lawrence. You might want to up the ante a little bit and trying to get a little bit more creative before the snap and doing some things like that. But overall, like, it is a team that we know is willing, to throw the football. If we were picking their pass play book, in Madden, I would say more pass balance. They're not like a complete pass heavy team. They've shown a willingness to try to stick with it on the ground. But ultimately, this is a coaching staff that I think mostly depend on lining up their guys and having a good quarterback and letting them win. I mean, they're pretty much doing the normal route concepts, things you're used to doing. So it's like a C. I give them like a grade of a C. They're not killing the team, but I also don't think they're very innovative minds.
And that takes us to a win total that isn't exactly the highest in the world, just 8.5, minus 150 lean on the over, plus 275 odds to win the AFC South, second behind the Texans. So I wrote over on the show sheet, Dwain. As you can tell, obviously not super confident in that because I'm debating going under, but I'm going to go over. A leap of faith in T-Law playing up to his potential. They have won 9 games in back-to-back seasons. Look, I feel like the Eagles are the poster child from last year of a team that just collapsed after looking really good to start the year. But the Jaguars were 8-3 before losing 5 of their final 9 games 5 of their final 6 games, I should say, last season. So I think a large part of that was the defense, allowing 28-plus points in 5 of their final 9 games. They extended Josh, now Hines Allen, and brought back Eric Armstead on a big money deal. Again, not overly confident, but give me the over 8.5. I'm going to guess you're going under though, Dwain.
I mean, 8.5, like it's right in the middle. It's tough to take either, but yeah, I would go with the under.
Good to get a little bit differentiation there, and good to get a shout out to our friends over at DraftKings Sportsbook. We are partnered with DraftKings Sportsbook, and right now all new customers who bet just $5 will get $150 back in bonus bets instantly. Download the DraftKings app now and sign up using our promo code FantasyLife. And yeah, guys, again, $5 on anything and receive $150 in bonus bets instantly. If you want to check out the UFC Fight Night card this weekend, which I will certainly be viewing because, it's Saturday night. What else am I going to do? Hang out with friends, go to a bar? No, I'm going to chill and watch UFC because that's what freaking men do, people. But yeah, we got Rose Namajunas versus Tracy Cortez in the main event. Thug Rose been one of the more entertaining, just, regardless of male or female fighters over the years. Absolute queen out there. Santiago Ponzinibbio versus Muslim Salikhov. I will tell you this. I could not tell you a single thing about Muslim Salikhov, but I bet on all UFC fighters whose last name ends in Ov. So let's go get that money. And yeah, Drew Dober versus Gene Silva in the featured fight should be an absolute banger. So if sports betting is not yet available in your state, don't worry. DraftKings is the one-stop shop for all things daily fantasy, where you can join in on all the fun and have the shot to win cash prizes. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. New customers, again, use our promo code FantasyLife and bet just $5 on any wager and get $150 in bonus bets instantly. That's promo code FantasyLife only at DraftKings Sportsbook. All right, Dwain, mentioned kind of the tight end position, Evan Engram, previously. Now, there's been some debate in our fantasy, circle that we got going on about what constitutes an elite tight end. I think everyone, though, can agree that Engram is not quite there. That said, after the big 7, he is, depending on the site, usually being ranked as that tight end 8, ahead of guys like Jake Ferguson, David Njoku, and Dallas Goedert, Brock Bowers as well, who typically round out our tight end 1 tier. So, the targets were there last year, 143 of them. Only scored 4 touchdowns. So on the one hand, you could argue that he is due for some touchdown regression, but I believe it was Hayden Winks, who I first saw pointing this out. Really did seem like the heavy majority of that came without Christian Kirk in the offense. Specifically, 7.7 half PPR points in 11 games with Christian Kirk last year, 5 games without, buoyed up to 15.5. So also have Brian Thomas Jr., also have Gabe Davis. I look at Engram, and he's kind of got that David Njoku check down role in this offense where, as much as I want to follow the targets and everything, I just don't see him getting prioritized in the red zone. I don't see him getting prioritized down the field. So yes, he's got a high target projection, but he doesn't necessarily have the types of targets that we would prefer to get in Fantasyland.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key is if Brian Thomas Jr., if you knew that he was going to fail, then I would feel a lot better about Evan Engram. But right now, like Gabe Davis, I'm not worried about. 2 totally different roles. Evan Ingram's going to out target, Gabe Davis. But if it's just him and Christian Kirk, even, I think we could feel better about it. Although they are both lining up from the interior, but Christian Kirk is attacking further down the field, so I don't think that's a challenge. When they were on the field together last year, Christian Kirk had 11.2 average depth of target, and to your point, Evan Engram was really in that check down role. 4.3 average depth of target when those two are out there together. That's on 305 routes. So not a huge sample, but a decent size sample. But when he was on the field with all 3 guys, Calvin Ridley, Christian Kirk, and Evan Engram, obviously he was on this field with himself. Dwayne, you're an idiot. 21% target share. And then you had 26% to Christian Kirk, 21% to Calvin Ridley. So look, I think it's like I don't want to even call him one. It's like 2A, 2B between Christian Kirk and Evan Engram. I think they're going to both be fine, but yeah, I don't think you can call Evan Engram an elite tight end. I think even just looking at, his historical fantasy finishes, he's just been a little bit all over the place. I do think he's settled in nicely in this scheme, and I think he's about priced right. Where he's going right now is typically he's usually the tight end 8, tight end 9, something like that off of the board. I'm writing up my tight end tiers today, and Evan Engram is the next guy in my queue to write up. So I may have a little bit of a different opinion once I do a little bit of a deeper dive. But on the surface, I think he's priced about right. He's a guy that if you miss out on the guys that are younger or ascending or the true elites that we already know we have, then Evan Engram is kind of that next name in the queue that you're going to want to look at in your fantasy drafts.
I will say the big, bullish case on Evan Engram is just the fact that Doug Peterson knows how to enable a good fantasy tight end. Now, he's had some really good ones over the years for sure, but man, not even including the Chiefs stuff, since 2016, with Zach Ertz, tight end 3, tight end 3, tight end 2, tight end 4, Goddard had a tight end 9 finish in 2020, and Engram over these past 2 years, man, tight end 7 and tight end 5. So bunches of targets to the position, but I'm with you, comes in as my tight end 8 right there behind Kyle Pitts and George Kittle. On ESPN, at least, Engram is going ahead of Kyle Pitts, which I would not advise. Give me Pitts over Engram 8 days of the week. But more sites than not, we are seeing Engram go at that tight end 8 spot, which, to your point, Dwayne, when I do miss out on the, elite top 7 tight ends, that's when I am, more so fine with reaching on Engram. Because, hey, I do not want to get past, Dallas Goedert basically and not have one of these guys. With that said, though, Evan Engram, Dwayne, someone where we probably want to throw a late round dart at a position. If I'm in my home redraft league and I get, Trey McBride or George Kittle, I probably don't even need to draft a second tight end. Engram, maybe I'm a bit more willing to, throw something out there at Noah Fant or Jonnu late. Do you concur?
Yeah, I agree. In most home leagues, though, those guys are going to be waiver wire. But if it's a deep draft, where you're going like 18, 20 rounds, then I think you're definitely looking at a Jonnu, a Noah, somebody like that. But Engram, I think he's going to be fine. Like, I feel really good that he's going to be a top 10 tight end. The question is, what do you give up when you take him in that range of a draft? There could be other wide receivers you still like more. Maybe you need a running back. It's tough for me. Ingram's one of those names that even though my tight end spot may still be open, when I start looking at the players at the other positions around him, I start thinking, like Evan Engram will be nice here, but I like the upside of this player at running back. I like the floor, or maybe I just know that I need a running back, and I still feel better about tight end, being able to come back with someone like an Njoku multiple rounds later, pretty similar profile to what we have with Evan Engram.
Final, I guess, fantasy relevant-esque player in this offense we haven't spoken too much about is RB2 Tank Bigsby. Again, can't overstate how bad he was last year. He had 4 targets, 3 of them were dropped, and 2 of those drops led directly to interceptions on the very same play. 2.6 yards per carry. Don't think we need to really get into the advanced metrics to tell you that was not a very good season on the ground. That said, Doug Peterson in March, we got to get Tank going. Bottom line, he's too good. That's why we drafted him. Peterson unsolicited in May on a question about Travis Etienne. We need to get Bigsby more touches to keep Etienne fresh. So the question, Dwayne, is if more touches could be 4 or 5, or if you could actually, carve out something close to standalone value. I highly doubt it, but because of how bad he was last year, 18 round drafts, he is almost always there in the final round. Tank Bigsby versus someone like Dameon Pierce versus, let's see, who'd be another one. Let's just do that. Bigsby versus Dameon Pierce. Who would you rather throw a dart at?
Dameon Pierce. Yeah. But I think you're mixing up guys at that point because we really don't know. I think there is a good chance that he is back to being the legit number 2 behind Travis Etienne. And I think that's really all we can say about him at this point. So we'll have to keep an eye on it in training camp. And hopefully, the news is positive. He's not fumbling and doing things like that.
I will say, give me Tyrone Tracy ahead of him. Give me Elijah Mitchell ahead of him. Give me Clyde Edwards-Helaire ahead of him. I think Bigsby versus like Alexander Madison. That's a really deep discussion we could have, Dwayne. You want to extend this podcast by 30 minutes so we can talk Bigsby versus Madison?
You're freaking out, producer Swing, right now.
Love you, King Swing. All right, guys, as we conclude all these team previews we are now going to compare the Jaguars to a TV or a movie character. And I'm going to go with Kendall Roy from Succession here, one of my favorite shows ever, and definitely of the last few recent years. But yeah, Kendall Roy basically being Trevor Lawrence. Supposed to be the next big thing, supposed to be the successor, the prince who was promised, as Nick Wright so eloquently puts it. So yeah, man, called the successor for a while, but never quite saw him take the step to really be the guy. There were flashes. We had the Kendall Roy press conference, I believe, at the end of season 2, where we got the smirk from Logan finally. We had the amazing wild card comeback from T-Law and the Jaguars over the Chargers at the end of his second season. But yeah, at the end of the day, the company / team is really going to be and go as far as, Kendall and T-Law takes it. Certainly it didn't work out all that great, in succession. We'll see if things can be different for Trevor Lawrence. So over to you, Mr. McFarland.
Wow, we're gonna have to have these in the show sheet because I had Kendall Roy down.
What?
But I'm gonna
let's go.
Hey, that's what I had. So you did a great job of covering that. So I'm gonna pivot. What do we have? We have to think here. Trevor Lawrence. What? He's the chosen one.
The prince to his promise.
Let's go Neo. Let's go Neo from Matrix. You're the chosen one. The Oracle is Trent Baalke. He still believes. Who's Morpheus in this equation? I guess it's Doug Peterson. He needs to whisper in Trevor Lawrence's ear instead of whispering in his damn tight end's ear all the time. Try that, So yeah, I would say we go with that. And that's probably the positive spin on it. If we wanted to go with the chosen one turning the wrong way, would be Anakin Skywalker turning into Darth Vader. But you could argue that he did get to the top of his game and kick a lot of ass. So ultimately, though, Neo does overcome it all, and he's a positive character. So we'll stick with that. For Trevor Lawrence, I'll go with Neo. The easy one, if we were going pure on vibes, I could have just gone Keanu Reeves, Johnny Utah, Point Break. God, so
great movie.
So yeah, there's a lot of ways we could go with it, but I'll go with Neo, and we'll be positive.
Johnny Utah from?
God dang it, I don't know. Utah State.
Buckeyes, Ohio State. Keanu Reeves took like a couple of acting classes at Ohio State. So in the replacements and in Point Break, he refers to his character as an ex-Ohio State,
okay.
So gotta love
Of course you would have that pool.
Of course, bro. I got it. I did watch Point Break, the original one for the first time this last year. Fantastic movie. We will see if the Jaguars 2024 season can be as fantastic. So appreciate you guys again tuning into the Fantasy Life show. You can check out my team preview on the Jaguars over at FantasyLife.com in written form. Dwain's projections, consensus, Fantasy Life ranks, all that, and truly, guys, so much more. You heard Matthew Berry talk about again everything we are now offering with Fantasy Life Plus. So great day to be great as always there. So for Dwain, for producer Matt, I'm Ian. Thanks again for tuning into the Fantasy Life show. And until next time, take care, everybody.